So I'm going to show you some examples of CSS. I'm going to kind of follow the same structure we did in the presentation, starting with this, which is just a basic document, not a whole lot of content in here. When I display it in a browser, you can see this is it right here. It's just your basic web page. Should be very similar to what you did for your resume project. So the first thing I'm going to do is I add some inline code in here, but this is XHTML tags. Most of these are deprecated. So for example, the font tag has been deprecated, the B tag is deprecated. This is the old way of applying style to a web page. You can see in my actual page, let me just refresh that. So there's my header, there's the header with the +6 and the blue color. And again, I didn't really make too many changes. Here's the thing though, if you take a look at this, for me to have this style apply also to this and this H2 tag, in order for that to work, I have to put all this stuff on each one of these lines. So I have to remember to go through and put this on each H2 tag in order to get that to work. So for example, if I go to my version 3, you can see in here I have my my inline style showing, with the bigger header and also with the blue background on the paragraph. So you can see here I made the paragraph +1 for the font size and a different shade of blue. So what I want to do is I want to get all this stuff out of my HTML, and I want to get it up into the head of the document. Before I do that, I have a 3.5 here I want to show you. This is, I converted in this one from the font tag, which is deprecated, which if you've tried HTML years ago, you may have used the font tag. You might see examples online, older examples using the font tag. This is what we should be using, something that looks more like this. So you can see here I have span. This is an inline style sheet. So the span is just the tag. It's an inline tag. It really doesn't do anything except you can span something with a class or an ID or an inline style. That's really all you would use it for. In this case, I set the color to 3366, the size to 3EM, which is 3 times the size of an uppercase letter M. We learned that from the presentation. And I set the font weight to bold. Now the thing is, even though I'm using the newer style sheet, the newer CSS syntax here, which is correct, I'm still doing inline, so I still have to apply it to each HTML element that I want to display that way. And you can see here, I'll go to my 3.5 example, and you can see it's definitely applying it here. But again, I have to do it on each element individually, or each object individually in the page. So going to the fourth example, notice in my code I don't have any of that code in here to affect the styling of the page anymore. It's just the pure data now. It's and it's semantically, it describes the data. There's no extra stuff in there to show us for the browser to use to display it. Instead, I move that all up here to the top. So I'll just talk about some of the things I did. So body is the body tag. So I'm telling it for the entire body of the document, use the Arial font and a background color of FFFFF, which is all colors on, which means it's going to be white. The H1 tag is going to be this color, and then the font size is 2EM. Then my H2, a little bit smaller font, different color. The P tag, again, different color, a little bit smaller font. And then I have my A tag, which I applied a color to. I put text decoration none to make sure it's not underlined, so I didn't want it to get underlined. By default, some browsers like to underline text, so text decoration means don't underline it, and I made it bold. The other thing I did is when you hover, so a hover is a special property. So there's a special property for the anchor tag, which is the hover. So when you hover over the anchor or hover over the A tag, it'll change the color to what you see here, this F1 tag. So let me show you what that looks like in the browser. So I'll go to the next example. And here it is. And you can see it changed the font size, or not the size, but the type. Here, it's just using the default font. But when I go here, it's now Arial, and it's now a little bit bigger. So it looks a little different. Looks a little nicer, I think. It's a little easier to read, the Arial. And because I did it at the body level, it applied it to the entire page in one declaration. So the entire page is now Arial. I could go to one place and change the entire page to Times New Roman or Courier New or whatever font I like. By the way, the color scheme that you see here, I'm not very good with colors. I never know which color to use. So how did I do that? First, you've got the web page for our textbook that has color charts on it. You could use that to pick out colors. Or in my case, I go to this page, colored RD, or colored, but colrd.com, and here you can pick out color palettes. This is the palette that I'm using right now, and you go to CSS, and it will show you the hex or the RGB notation, and you can even copy it to your clipboard, and it copies it to your clipboard. So it's kind of cool, and you can save your own palettes. So if you don't have much of an eye for this kind of stuff, you can use this to come up with a nice color palette for your site. So again, I've moved all the styling up into the head of the page. In the next example, in number 5, I've added a few more things. So I added a line height. That's going to give me more space between the lines. So it's going to add a little white space, make it a little bit more readable. Some other things I did here, I added a class for called .norm. So now I've got a class for paragraphs that are normal and a class for paragraphs that are code snippets. So, if this were my blog or something, I might have code snippets. And for my code snippets, I want to use Courier New, which is a monospace font, which is easier for reading code. Everything else is going to be pretty much the same, except I added a little margin here. Actually, I'm going to make this margin a little bit smaller, so maybe I'll make it a 5 EM margin. I've also changed the background color. So you'll see when you look at my code lines, which are these, that have a different class name, it's going to have a different look to it. It's going to have some padding. We learned how to do that in the lecture portion. So let me show you what that looks like. So there it is. Here's my code. That's the little class that I added. You've got a little more line spacing here. So if you look, you can see the difference. There's a little bit more spacing in those lines. This stayed the same, so the links all stayed the same. Alright, so there was one more change that I made in number 6, but we'll come to that in the next one, so we'll pick this up in the next video.